The city did not panic all at once. At first, it was only rain-heavy, relentless sheets pounding the streets of San Francisco, flooding gutters, swallowing headlights, turning familiar corners into mirrors of fear. Sirens threaded through the storm, then vanished again, swallowed by wind. Power flickered. Traffic lights died. The night began to feel unanchored, as if the city had slipped off its usual rhythm and into something darker. Then the alert came through. A brief, chilling message crackled across police radios and emergency feeds, a security failure at San Francisco Zoo. Structural damage, an enclosure compromised, one animal unaccounted for, a lion. For a few seconds, no one spoke.
You're a little messy, aren't
you? The word itself seemed unreal, out of place among storm drains and cable cars. A lion belonged to documentaries and distant savannas, not a city already drowning in rain. But confirmation followed, quickly, clipped, and urgent. The animal was a fully grown male, nearly 500 pounds. Powerful, fast, somewhere beyond the broken perimeter. Phones lit up across the city. Social media exploded with grainy screenshots and half-verified claims. Lock your doors, stay inside. Lion loose near the park. Fear spread faster than the storm. Police units rerouted, abandoning routine calls to converge near the zoo. Helicopters tried to lift but were grounded by wind. Streets emptied in pockets as people hurried inside, dragging children, slamming doors. Somewhere a restaurant closed mid-service. A bus screeched to a halt and rerouted without explanation. And in the middle of it all, unseen and unheard above the chaos, the lion moved. His name was Atlas. He did not roar as he crossed the damaged boundary. He did not bolt blindly into the night. The cameras that caught a glimpse of him later would show something far more unsettling than aggression purpose. Atlas moved low in steady rain, slicking his main paws, silent against soaked ground. He did not charge toward noise or light. He avoided both. Inside the zoo, handlers argued in hushed urgency. Protocols were recited, then discarded, as conditions made them impossible. Tranquilizers required visibility. Visibility required light. Light required power. Every option narrowed, closing in on the same unspoken conclusion: if Atlas encountered a human, before they could reach him, the outcome would be unpredictable. Outside, the zoo police prepared for the worst. Rifles were unholstered. Streets were cordoned off. Commands were repeated again and again: do not engage unless absolutely necessary. A lion in the city was not just a danger, it was a liability. One wrong move, one scream, one sudden step from a doorway, and the night could end in blood. No one yet understood what Atlas was actually doing. Reports came in fragmented and confused. A shadow near a freeway on-ramp. A large shape slipping between parked cars. A startled jogger swearing he saw a mane vanish into an alley. Each sighting widened the circle of fear, pushing it outward like a shockwave. He's heading downtown, someone said. No, he's moving toward the waterfront. No, wait, he's not running. He's walking. That detail didn't calm anyone. It made things worse. Predators run when they're panicked. They scatter. They lash out. Atlas did none of that. He moved with intention, rain beating along his back nose, low to the ground. He paused often, lifting his head, inhaling deeply, as if the storm itself carried information. No one watching the monitors could explain it. Lions don't navigate cities. They don't track through concrete and steel. They don't choose paths that avoid crowds and converge on quiet, unless they're following something they know. At an intersection near the park, a police cruiser skidded to a stop. An officer stepped out, rain plastering his jacket to his shoulders. For a split second, he thought he saw the lion, just the edge of movement behind a row of cypress trees. His hand went to his radio, then froze. The shape disappeared. Visual lost, he reported, voice tight. Across the city, fear sharpened into something more specific. Parents held children close. Windows stayed dark. The storm masked every sound, turning each thud of thunder into a possible warning. News anchors speculated. Commentators argued. No one had answers. What no one said out loud but everyone felt was the inevitability of a confrontation. A lion loose in a city cannot remain a mystery for long. Eventually paths cross. Eventually someone sees something they shouldn't. And when that happens, instinct takes over on both sides. At the zoo command center, a senior handler stared at the screen, heart pounding. He's not hunting, she whispered almost to herself. He's searching. The word hung there heavy and unexplained. Atlas slipped past a flooded underpass, then turned sharply following a route that made no sense on any map. He moved toward a part of the city most people avoided at night, even without a storm, quiet plazas, darkened walkways, places where the rain pooled and the city forgot itself. Police units closed in, unaware they were converging on the same point from different directions. Orders crackled through radios. Extreme caution. Do not provoke. Be prepared to neutralize. The storm showed no sign of stopping. Neither did Atlas. Somewhere ahead beneath an old structure, where the rain hit softer and the wind broke, a man lay sleeping in soaked cardboard, unaware that the night was about to rewrite everything he thought he knew about being forgotten. And that was the moment, the one no alert could prepare anyone for, when the city's fear was about to collide with a truth so unexpected, it would leave even hardened officers standing in the rain, hands shaking, eyes wet, wondering how they had ever misunderstood what they were witnessing. Because the lion was not running from the city. He was running towards someone it had already abandoned. Michael Carter had learned how to disappear without actually leaving. In a city as crowded and restless as San Francisco, that kind of disappearance required a strange discipline. You learned where not to stand, how to fold yourself into doorways so you didn't block foot traffic, when to lift your eyes and when to keep them down. You learned the rhythm of being seen just enough to be avoided. By the time the storm rolled in that night, Michael had been invisible for years. Most people who passed him near the old plaza by the waterfront assumed he had always been there, another nameless figure wrapped in layers of damp clothing, another man who had somehow failed at life and settled into the margins. They did not imagine that his hands, rough and cracked from cold, had once measured diets, cleaned enclosures, and steadied frightened animals with practiced calm. They did not imagine that he used to be someone the city trusted. Michael had not planned to become homeless. No one ever does. It happened the way most quiet tragedies do, one decision that seemed small at the time, followed by consequences that grew faster than he could outrun them. Years earlier, he had worked at the zoo as a senior animal caretaker. He was good at it. More than good. Animals responded to him in ways they didn't to others. He noticed changes early, subtle shifts in appetite, posture, mood. He took pride in doing the job the right way, even when budgets tightened and corners were quietly shaved. When he spoke up about those corners, he believed naively that integrity still mattered. It didn't take long after that for his position to become redundant. His concerns were reframed as insubordination. His record, once spotless, grew suddenly complicated. A settlement was offered, then quietly withdrawn. References dried up. Months passed, savings thinned, rent lapsed. The city kept moving. Michael did not protest loudly. That wasn't his nature. He packed his things into boxes, then into a car, then into fewer bags than he remembered owning. When the car was gone, the bags became heavier. When the bags were gone, the nights became longer. Still, he told himself he could handle it, that it would be temporary. Temporary stretched into years. The streets taught him new routines, where to find warmth when the fog rolled in, which shelters filled fastest, how to endure the sideways glances, the looks that slid past him as if his face were a smudge on glass. The worst part was not hunger or cold. It was the erosion of identity, being reduced day by day to what people assumed about him. No one asked what he used to do. No one asked what he still remembered. Michael carried those memories carefully, like fragile objects that could shatter if handled too often. He remembered early mornings at the zoo before visitors arrived, when the animals were most themselves. He remembered the sounds, the low calls, the breathing, the way the world felt balanced before the gates opened. And he remembered one lion in particular. Atlas. Atlas had arrived as a cub, all oversized paws and uncertain eyes. Michael had been there from the beginning, sitting quietly near the enclosure, speaking softly, letting the animal learn his presence without pressure. Atlas had grown fast, powerful, watchful. But with Michael, he had always been calm, curious, trusting. That trust had never been about dominance. It had been about consistency. Michael showed up every day. He spoke the same way. He moved the same way. Atlas learned his voice the way a child learns a parent's footsteps. Those memories followed Michael even after the zoo faded from his life. On nights when sleep came slowly, he would find himself humming without realizing it, the same low cadence he used when Atlas was restless. Sometimes he stopped mid-note, embarrassed by the sound echoing against concrete. On the night of the storm, Michael did what he always did. He found a spot where the rain hit less hard beneath an aging structure near the water. He layered cardboard beneath himself, wrapped his jacket tighter, and waited for the city to finish raging. The wind cut through everything. Rain crept in from the edges, soaking his clothes, stiffening his joints. He did not know that alarms were sounding across the city. He did not know that police units were converging or that social media was buzzing with fear. He did not know that somewhere not far away, Atlas was moving through streets Michael himself had walked countless times. Michael slept fitfully, waking now and then to the sound of thunder, his body shivering despite his efforts. In his half-dreams, the past pressed close. He thought of warm enclosures and dry floors, of hands on thick fur, of a lion's breath steady and familiar. Above him, the city roared and panicked. Below that noise, something else moved with quiet purpose. People passed Michael earlier that evening without slowing. A couple quickened their pace when they saw him. A man glanced down, then away. A woman stepped around him as if he were an obstacle rather than a person. No one noticed the way his breathing had grown shallow or how the cold had begun to settle deeper into his bones. Michael had learned not to expect help. He did not know that help of a kind no one would believe was already searching for him. What made Michael's story unbearable to those who would later hear it was not just the hardship he endured, but the contrast it revealed. A man who had dedicated his life to caring for animals had been discarded by the very systems he tried to protect. He had become invisible in a city that prided itself on compassion. And yet somewhere in the storm, something remembered him. The city had walked past Michael Carter for years, but Atlas had not. And as Michael slept in the cold, unaware of the converging footsteps, human and otherwise, the gap between being forgotten and being remembered was about to close in the most impossible way. Because sometimes the ones we save never stop looking for us, even when the world tells them they should. Atlas could have disappeared into the storm. Every instinct written into his body told him how. When danger erupts, predators scatter. They seek darkness, distant silence. The city offered all three in abundance. That night, alleys, underpasses, shuttered streets washed clean by rain. If Atlas had run, no one would have blamed him. In fact, that was exactly what everyone expected. But Atlas did not run. He slowed. The rain slicked his mane flat against his neck as he moved beyond the zoo's broken perimeter and into the unfamiliar geometry of the city. Concrete replaced earth beneath his paws, cold and unyielding, yet he stepped carefully, adjusting his weight with a precision that startled those who would later review the footage. There was no panic in his gait, no erratic movement. His body language was controlled, deliberate, as if each step answered a question only he could hear. Police radios crackled with updates, voices sharp with tension. Visual near the freeway. Possible movement by the park. Proceed with caution. None of the voices noticed the pattern forming on the maps. None of them yet realized that Atlas was not avoiding capture, he was ignoring it. Because Atlas wasn't responding to the city, he was responding to memory. He paused at a flooded intersection, lifting his head into the wind. Rain ran down his muzzle as he inhaled deeply, sorting through layers of scent carried by the storm oil metal, wet concrete, fear. Then beneath it all, something else, something older. Fainter but unmistakable. Atlas turned, not toward noise, not toward light, toward quiet. This was the detail that unsettled the experts later. Lions don't navigate by nostalgia. They don't choose paths based on familiarity alone. And yet Atlas moved with the certainty of someone following a thread only he could see weaving through the city as if it were a landscape he had always known. He avoided crowds instinctively. When a bus roared past, he waited. When voices echoed too loudly, he changed direction. He slipped through spaces humans barely noticed, between buildings, along waterlogged paths, through shadows softened by rain. Every choice reduced the chance of confrontation. Atlas was not hunting, he was searching. The first officer who caught a clear glimpse of him felt his pulse spike, not because the lion charged, but because he didn't. Atlas crossed the edge of a plaza at a measured pace, head low, tail still, eyes focused ahead. The officer raised his weapon, then hesitated. Something about the lion's movement felt wrong in a way training had not prepared him for. Predators on the move radiate tension. Atlas radiated intent. "He's not spooked," the officer said into his radio voice tight. "He's focused." No one responded. Atlas continued on rain pooling around his paws. He passed storefronts, shuttered tight reflections, shivering in the glass. Once he stopped entirely, lifting his head again, inhaling. His chest expanded slowly, deeply, as if calibrating himself against the storm. Then he turned, slightly angling toward the waterfront, toward the old plaza, toward the place where Michael slept. Michael Carter lay curled beneath a sagging structure, cardboard soaked through his body, trembling with cold. He did not hear the sirens anymore. Exhaustion had pressed him into a half-sleep where memory and present blurred together. He dreamed of the zoo not as it was at the end, but as it had been years ago. Quiet mornings, steady routines. A lion cub blinking into the light. Atlas closed the distance in silence. He emerged from the rain like a shape pulled from shadow water, streaming off his coat, breath steady despite the cold. For a long moment, he stood a few yards away, watching the man on the ground. He did not approach immediately. He observed, head tilted slightly, ears flicking, as if listening for something beyond sound. Then Michael shifted in his sleep, coughing weakly. Atlas stepped forward. The movement was sudden enough to startle a passerby across the plaza, who froze mid-step, heart hammering. The man saw the lion leap and screamed. Atlas landed on Michael. The scream tore through the night. Someone shouted. Another voice yelled for help. Within seconds, chaos erupted as people scattered and police units converged, weapons drawn, adrenaline surging. From a distance, it looked like the worst had happened, a lion attacking a homeless man in the rain. Up close, it was something else entirely. Atlas did not bite. He did not strike. He did not pin Michael with force meant to harm. Instead, he folded himself over the man's body, positioning his massive frame as a shield against the wind and rain. His weight settled carefully, distributing warmth rather than pressure. One powerful foreleg stretched protectively across Michael's chest, anchoring him in place. Michael stirred, gasping, eyes fluttering open. For a split second, terror flared, then vanished. Through the blur of rain and shock, he saw the shape above him, the familiar curve of a mane, the eyes he knew as well as his own reflection. His breath hitched, his voice cracked. "Atlas," he whispered. The lion's body stilled. At the sound of his name, something in Atlas softened visibly. His head lowered closer to Michael's face, breath warm against cold skin. A deep rumbling sound vibrated through his chest, not a roar, not a growl, but something quieter and older. Comfort. Police lights flooded the plaza, red and blue slicing through the rain. Officers shouted commands, voices overlapping, hands trembling on triggers. They saw a lion atop a man and prepared for the only outcome they had trained for. Then they saw Michael's hand. He had lifted it weakly, fingers brushing the lion's mane with a familiarity no one could fake. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't screaming. He was crying. Atlas did not move when weapons aimed at him. He did not bare his teeth. He did not react to the shouting. His attention never left Michael. The storm continued to hammer down, but within the small circle of his body, Michael felt something he hadn't felt in years. Warmth, safety, recognition. Atlas had not run from the city's fear. He had walked straight into it and rewritten its meaning. Where others saw a threat, he became shelter. Where the night promised violence, he delivered protection. This was the moment when everything people thought they understood about danger collapsed under the weight of truth. The lion who didn't run was not defying instinct. He was following it back to the one human who had once taught him what safety felt like. And as the rain poured down and the city held its breath, it became clear that the most dangerous assumption anyone had made that night was believing they knew what a lion would do when he finally found the person he had been looking for all along. No one had trained for a moment like this. Rain streamed down the visors of police helmets as officers formed a tightening perimeter around the plaza. Red and blue lights cut through the storm in violent pulses, reflecting off wet pavement and the marble columns nearby. Every protocol they knew pointed to the same conclusion: a lion on top of a civilian was an immediate lethal threat. Hands shook, not from weakness, but from the unbearable weight of responsibility. "Clear shot," someone asked into a radio voice breaking slightly as it fought the roar of rain. No one answered. because what they were seeing didn't match the words they were supposed to use. Atlas remained draped over Michael Carter, his massive body curved protectively, mane plastered down by water. He did not bare his teeth. He did not growl. He did not react to the ring of weapons trained on him. His attention never wavered from the man beneath him, whose thin chest rose and fell unevenly against the cold. Michael was crying, not screaming, not begging, crying the way people do when something lost has suddenly returned. One officer took a half step forward, boots slipping slightly on stone. His finger hovered at the edge of the trigger guard. He had faced armed suspects before. He had faced chaos. But this made his chest feel tight in a way no danger ever had, because the man on the ground wasn't struggling. He had one trembling hand buried in the lion's mane, and the lion was purring. Not loudly, not theatrically. A low resonant vibration that could be felt more than heard, humming through the rain, like a heartbeat too large for a human body. It was the sound of calm, of familiarity, of something deeply wrong and deeply right happening at the same time. "Hold," a commanding voice said over the radio. "Firmer now. Everyone hold." The word traveled down the line, passed from mouth to mouth, gun to gun. No one fired. A senior officer edged closer, movements slow and deliberate, making sure his boots scraped loudly enough to announce each step. Atlas's ears flicked once, acknowledging the sound, but his body did not tense. He did not shift into aggression. He simply tightened his protective curl around Michael, as if bracing him against the world. Michael coughed, weakly, rainwater and cold catching in his lungs. "It's okay," he whispered, voice barely audible. Whether he was speaking to the officers or the lion, no one could tell. "He won't hurt anyone." The words landed heavier than any command. One of the officers closest to the scene felt his throat tighten. He had seen people lie to save themselves before. He had never seen someone speak with this kind of certainty while pinned beneath 500 pounds of muscle and claw. "Sir," the officer said, lowering his weapon a fraction. "Can you move?" Michael shook his head slowly. "I don't want him to move," he said. "He's keeping me warm." That did it. Across the perimeter, something shifted. Weapons lowered inch by inch, not because of an order, but because of recognition. Because fear was being replaced by understanding in real time, and understanding demanded a different response. A paramedic arrived at the edge of the circle, breathless. She froze when she saw the scene, then instinctively knelt, hands hovering uselessly in the rain. There was no safe way to approach, while Atlas remained where he was. "Michael," she called gently, "we need to help you." Michael looked up at her, eyes glassy but focused. "Let him stay," he said. "Just a little longer." Atlas's head lifted slightly at the sound of Michael's voice. He looked toward the officers, not with hostility, but with awareness. His gaze moved from face to face, reading the tension, the restraint, the sudden quiet. Then he lowered his head again, pressing his forehead briefly against Michael's shoulder. It was not defiance. It was reassurance. The officers watched in silence as rain soaked through their uniforms. Some had tears streaming down their faces, indistinguishable from the water pouring from the sky. One officer, a veteran with decades on the force, wiped his eyes with the back of his glove and stared at the ground. "I've never seen anything like this," he murmured. Neither had anyone else. A wildlife specialist arrived moments later, moving with the careful calm of someone who understood animal behavior, not as theory, but as language. He surveyed the scene quickly, then raised his hand slightly, not as a command, but as a sign of respect. "Atlas," Michael whispered again, voice thin but steady. "It's okay." At the sound of his name, Atlas responded instantly. His breathing slowed. His purr deepened. The specialist nodded, understanding, passing between them without words. "Don't rush him," the specialist said softly to the officers. "He's not guarding territory. He's guarding a person." That distinction mattered. It reframed everything. What the police were witnessing was not a threat scenario, it was a caregiving one. Atlas's body language told a story no report could capture. His weight distribution was careful. His claws remained retracted. His muscles, though powerful, were relaxed. This was not a lion asserting dominance. This was a lion refusing to abandon someone he recognized. The decision came quietly, without ceremony. No shots would be fired. No aggressive maneuvers would be attempted. The priority shifted from neutralization to preservation for both of them. Atlas was given time. Michael was given warmth. and the officers were given something they had not expected that night, a lesson. They stood there in the rain watching an animal so often described as dangerous demonstrate a form of loyalty and care so pure it unraveled every assumption they carried. The line between protector and protected blurred, then dissolved entirely. When Atlas finally lifted his body, it was not sudden. He eased back inch by inch, never fully breaking contact, until Michael was safely wrapped in a thermal blanket and supported by paramedics. He stood then tall and still, rain cascading down his mane, eyes calm. Weapons remained lowered, not because they were told to, because no one could raise them again after understanding what they had just seen. In that soaked plaza under flashing lights and pounding rain, the police lowered their guns, not in surrender, but in reverence. They had come prepared for violence and instead encountered love so fierce it defied fear. And in that moment, hardened officers found themselves blinking back tears, realizing that the most dangerous thing they had brought to the scene was not their weapons, but their assumptions. Because sometimes what looks like an attack is actually an act of devotion. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do in the face of the unknown is to lower your gun and bear witness. The storm did not end that night when Atlas finally stepped away from Michael Carter. It ended later, slowly, quietly, when the truth surfaced and refused to sink back into the dark. Michael was taken to the hospital wrapped in layers of warmth, his body shaking less from cold than from the shock of being seen again. As paramedics worked, officers stayed close, not as guards but as witnesses. They had watched a narrative collapse in real-time: predator and victim, threat, enforced fear and control. None of those labels fit anymore. Atlas was escorted back under careful supervision, not as a criminal returning to confinement, but as an animal whose behavior demanded understanding. The specialists who walked beside him spoke softly, keeping their movements predictable. Atlas complied without resistance. He looked back once, only once, toward the ambulance lights disappearing down the street. Then he turned forward as if trusting that what needed to happen had already happened. By morning, the city woke to headlines that didn't know how to tell the story yet. Lion escapes zoo, jumps on homeless man. Police standoff, ends without shots fired. But those words felt thin, incomplete. They didn't explain why seasoned officers lowered their weapons or why a wildlife specialist said later, "I've never seen loyalty like that in an animal so powerful." The truth came together in pieces. Investigators learned who Michael Carter had been before the streets erased him. His employment records resurfaced. His written complaints about safety and animal welfare were retrieved from old servers. Emails showed warnings, ignored budget cuts, pushed through corners, trimmed where lives depended on care. Michael hadn't been fired for incompetence. He had been removed for insisting on standards others found inconvenient. The city had walked past him because it was easier. Atlas had not. Footage from the zoo revealed something else. Atlas's escape was not random. The enclosure damage was real, but the systems meant to prevent failure had been weakened long before the storm arrived. Maintenance deferred, staffing reduced, oversight diluted. The investigation widened, and with it came consequences. Leadership changes, public apologies, commitments to reform that could no longer hide behind press statements. Michael recovered slowly. Hypothermia left its mark, as did years of sleeping in the cold. But he stabilized. And when officers visited him in the hospital, they didn't come with questions. They came to listen. Some brought coffee. One brought a small notebook and asked Michael to tell him about Atlas, not the incident, but the lion's early days, how he learned to trust, what calmed him, what frightened him. Michael spoke quietly, choosing his words with care. He did not accuse. He did not gloat. He told the truth as he had always told it, steadily, without drama. When the zoo arranged a supervised reunion weeks later, it wasn't done for spectacle. No cameras were invited, no statements prepared. The moment belonged to the two of them. Atlas recognized Michael immediately. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. The lion's posture softened, his movements slowed, and the space between them filled with a calm that startled everyone present. Michael didn't reach out. He stood where he was, letting Atlas close the distance at his own pace. When Atlas lowered his head and pressed his forehead gently against Michael's chest, no one spoke. They didn't need to. The truth that changed everything was not just about a lion and a man. It was about memory, how it endures when systems fail. About loyalty, how it survives neglect and distance. about compassion, how it can exist where policies do not. The city had labeled Michael a problem and moved on. Atlas had remembered him as family. That difference mattered. It mattered to the officers who went home that night and hugged their children longer than usual. It mattered to the administrators who realized that risk management without integrity is just another word for abandonment. It mattered to a public forced to confront an uncomfortable reflection when people fall through the cracks. It is often animals who remind us what we owe one another. Michael was offered support housing and a role as a consultant this time, with protections written in ink, not promises. He accepted carefully, not because he needed validation, but because Atlas did, because the animals did, because truth once revealed demands responsibility. Atlas returned to a habitat redesigned with care enrichment and oversight restored. He remained the same lion, powerful, watchful, but those who worked with him noticed something new in his calm. As if the act of finding Michael had settled a long-held tension. As if loyalty once honored no longer needed to search. The storm became a story people would tell for years, not because it was frightening, but because it was clarifying. A lion escaped a zoo and jumped on a homeless man, and the reason made the police cry not out of weakness, but out of recognition. They cried because they had seen love where they expected violence, because they had witnessed truth strip away fear, because an animal had shown them that remembering someone is an act of courage in a world built to forget. The city did not change overnight, but something shifted, and sometimes that is how real change begins, not with outrage, but with a single moment so honest it cannot be ignored. Some stories leave us shaken because they are frightening. Others stay with us because they quietly challenge what we think we know about the world. This story does both. At first glance, it seemed like a nightmare scenario, a lion escaping into a city, a homeless man caught in the middle, police weapons raised under flashing lights and pouring rain. Every instinct told us how the story was supposed to end. Fear demanded a quick solution. Protocol demanded force. But what unfolded instead rewrote the meaning of danger. The first lesson this story teaches is about judgment. We judge situations quickly because we think speed equals safety. The police that night arrived prepared to neutralize a threat, and under normal circumstances, that preparation would have been justified. But true wisdom showed itself in the moment they paused. In that pause, they saw what fear had hidden, not an attack, but protection, not violence, but devotion. Sometimes the bravest decision is not to act, but to look again. The second lesson is about memory and loyalty. Atlas did not follow logic maps or instinctive fear. He followed memory. He followed the imprint of a man who once gave him safety, patience, and care. Years had passed, circumstances had changed. The world had forgotten Michael Carter, but Atlas had not. That kind of loyalty does not come from dominance or training. It comes from consistency, from showing up when no one is watching, from doing the right thing long before it becomes dramatic or visible. It forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. If an animal can remember kindness for a lifetime, why is it so easy for societies to forget the people who give it? The third lesson is about invisible people. Michael did not become homeless because he failed. He became homeless because he refused to stay silent. His fall was quiet, gradual, and unnoticed, exactly how so many lives slip through the cracks. The city learned to look past him, to step around him, to erase him. Atlas did the opposite, and in doing so, he held up a mirror to all of us. A reminder that worth does not disappear when status does. That dignity does not depend on shelter titles or income. That sometimes the ones we label as forgotten are the ones who once stood strongest for what was right. Finally, this story reminds us that compassion is not weakness. The officers who lowered their guns did not lose control, they gained clarity. They recognized that strength is not measured by force alone, but by restraint, empathy, and the courage to respond to what is real instead of what is assumed. Their tears were not signs of failure, they were signs of humanity intact. This was never just a story about a lion, it was a story about recognition, about what happens when love refuses to forget, when loyalty survives neglect, and when truth breaks through fear. Stories like this matter because they slow us down. They remind us that not every threat is what it seems, and not every act of power looks the way we expect. They invite us to be more careful with our judgments, more present with our compassion, and more aware of the lives we pass every day without seeing. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you pause, then it has already done something important. This is why we share animal stories like this, stories that inspire, heal, and remind us of the beauty of compassion across species. If you want to support more meaningful storytelling, more real moments that restore faith in connection and empathy, we invite you to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue telling stories that matter, stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Subscribe, stay with us, and let's keep sharing animal stories that remind us who we are when we choose to see.